Nevertheless, I will say this: among the letters are some that were addressed to the chancellor by one who, at that time, declared himself his disciple and his admirer, and who was destined, several years after, to rid himself of that irksome tutor and to govern alone. I trust that I make myself sufficiently clear. And on the next day: "The letters were written during the late emperor's illness. I need hardly add more to prove their importance." 4 days of silence, and then this final note, which caused a stir that has not yet been forgotten: "My investigation is finished. I now know everything. By dint of reflection, I have guessed the secret of the hiding place. My friends are going to Veldenz and, in spite of every obstacle, will enter the castle by a way which I am pointing out to them. The newspapers will then publish photographs of the letters, of which I already know the tenor. But I prefer to reproduce the whole text. This certain, inevitable publication will take place in a fortnight from to day precisely, on the 22nd of August next. Between this and then, I will keep silence and wait." The communications to the Grand Journal did, in fact, stop for a time; but Lupin never ceased corresponding with his friends via the hat, as they said among themselves. It was so simple! There was no danger. Who could ever suspect that Maître Quimbel's hat served Lupin as a letter box? Every 2 or 3 mornings, whenever he called, in fact, the celebrated advocate faithfully brought his client's letters: letters from Paris, letters from the country, letters from Germany, all reduced and condensed by Doudeville into a brief form and cipher language. And an hour later, Maître Quimbel solemnly walked away, carrying Lupin's orders. Now one day the governor of the Santé received a telephone message, signed L.M., informing him that Maître Quimbel was, in all probability, serving Lupin as his unwitting postman, and that it would be advisable to keep an eye upon the worthy man's visits. The governor told Maître Quimbel, who thereupon resolved to bring his junior with him. So, once again, in spite of all Lupin's efforts, in spite of his fertile powers of invention, in spite of the marvels of ingenuity which he renewed after each defeat, once again Lupin found himself cut off from communication with the outside world by the infernal genius of his formidable adversary. And he found himself thus cut off at the most critical moment, at the solemn minute when, from his cell, he was playing his last trump card against the coalesced forces that were overwhelming him so terribly. On the 13th of August, as he sat facing the two counsels, his attention was attracted by a newspaper in which some of Maître Quimbel's papers were wrapped up. He saw a heading in very large type: 813. The subheadings were: "A fresh murder. The excitement in Germany. Has the secret of the 'Apoon' been discovered?" Lupin turned pale with anguish. Below he read the words: "Two sensational telegrams reach us at the moment of going to press. The body of an old man has been found near Augsburg, with his throat cut with a knife. The police have succeeded in identifying the victim. It is Steinweg, the man mentioned in the Kesselbach case. On the other hand, a correspondent telegraphs that the famous English detective, Holmlock Shears, has been hurriedly summoned to Cologne. He will there meet the Emperor, and they will both proceed to Veldenz Castle. Holmlock Shears is said to have undertaken to discover the secret of the 'Apoon.' If he succeeds, it will mean the pitiful failure of the incomprehensible campaign which Arsène Lupin has been conducting for the past month in so strange a fashion. Perhaps public curiosity was never so much stirred as by the duel announced to take place between Shears and Lupin, an invisible duel in the circumstances, an anonymous duel, one might say, in which everything would happen in the dark, in which people would be able to judge only by the final results, and yet an impressive duel, because of all the scandal that circled around the adventure and because of the stakes in dispute between the two irreconcilable enemies, now once more opposed to each other. And it was a question not of small private interests, of insignificant burglaries, of trumpery individual passions, but of a matter of really world-wide importance, involving the politics of the 3 great Western nations and capable of disturbing the peace of the world. People waited anxiously, and no one knew exactly what he was waiting for. For, after all, if the detective came out victorious in the duel, if he found the letters, who would ever know? What proof would any one have of his triumph? In the main, all hopes were centred on Lupin, on his well-known habit of calling the public to witness his acts. What was he going to do? How could he avert the frightful danger that threatened him? Was he even aware of it? Those were the questions which men asked themselves. Between the 4 walls of his cell, prisoner 14 asked himself pretty nearly the same questions; and he, for his part, was not stimulated by idle curiosity, but by real uneasiness, by constant anxiety. He felt himself irrevocably alone, with impotent hands, an impotent will, an impotent brain. It availed him nothing that he was able, ingenious, fearless, heroic. The struggle was being carried on without him. His part was now finished. He had joined all the pieces and set all the springs of the great machine that was to produce, that was, in a manner of speaking, automatically to manufacture his liberty. And it was impossible for him to make a single movement to improve and supervise his handiwork. At the date fixed, the machine would start working. Between now and then, 1,000 adverse incidents might spring up, 1,000 obstacles arise, without his having the means to combat those incidents, or remove those obstacles. Lupin spent the unhappiest hours of his life at that time. He doubted himself. He wondered whether his existence would be buried for good in the horror of a jail. Had he not made a mistake in his calculations? Was it not childish to believe that the event that was to set him free would happen on the appointed date? "Madness!" he cried. "My argument is false. How can I expect such a concurrence of circumstances? There will be some little fact that will destroy all. The inevitable grain of sand." Steinweg's death and the disappearance of the documents which the old man was to make over to him did not trouble him greatly. The documents he could have done without in case of need. And, with the few words which Steinweg had told him, he was able, by dint of guesswork and his native genius, to reconstruct what the Emperor's letters contained and to draw up the plan of battle that would lead to victory. But he thought of Holmlock Shears, who was over there now, in the very centre of the battlefield, and who was seeking and who would find the letters, thus demolishing the edifice so patiently built up. And he thought of the other one, the implacable enemy, lurking round the prison, hidden in the prison perhaps, who guessed his most secret plans even before they were hatched in the mystery of his thought. The 17th of August, the 18th of August, the 19th: 2 more days. 2 centuries, rather. Oh, the interminable minutes! Lupin, usually so calm, so entirely master of himself, so ingenious at providing matter for his own amusement, was feverish, exultant and depressed by turns, powerless against the enemy, mistrusting everything and everybody, morose. The 20th of August. He would have wished to act, and he could not. Whatever he did, it was impossible for him to hasten the hour of the catastrophe. This catastrophe would take place or would not take place, but Lupin would not know for certain until the last hour of the last day was spent to the last minute. Then, and then alone, he would know of the definite failure of his scheme. The inevitable failure, he kept on repeating to himself. Success depends upon circumstances far too subtle and can be obtained only by methods far too psychological. There is no doubt that I am deceiving myself as to the value and the range of my weapons. And yet... Hope returned to him. He weighed his chances. They suddenly seemed to him real and formidable. The fact was going to happen, as he had foreseen it happening, and for the very reasons which he had expected. It was inevitable. Yes, inevitable. Unless, indeed, Shears discovered the hiding-place. And again he thought of Shears, and again an immense sense of discouragement overwhelmed him. The last day. He woke late, after a night of bad dreams. He saw nobody that day, neither the examining magistrate nor his counsel. The afternoon dragged along slowly and dismally, and the evening came, the murky evening of the cells. He was in a fever. His heart beat in his chest like the clapper of a bell. And the minutes passed, irretrievably. At 9 o'clock, nothing. At 10 o'clock, nothing. With all his nerves tense as the string of a bow, he listened to the vague prison sounds, tried to catch through those inexorable walls all that might trickle in from the life outside. Oh, how he would have liked to stay the march of time and to give destiny a little more leisure! But what was the good? Was everything not finished? "Oh," he cried, "I am going mad! If all this were only over! That would be better. I can begin again, differently. I shall try something else. But I can't go on like this. I can't go on." He held his head in his hands, pressing it with all his might, locking himself within himself and concentrating his whole mind upon one subject, as though he wished to provoke, as though he wished to create the formidable, stupefying, inadmissible event to which he had attached his independence and his fortune. "It must happen," he muttered. "It must.